Welcome to the Library of Congress National Book Festival. This panel is called The Family You Need, The Family You Create, Literary Fiction with Esmeralda, Santiago, and Luis Alberto Urrea. My name is Maria Sacchetti. I'm a reporter with the Washington Post, and it's an honor to introduce you. Esmeralda Santiago was born in rural Puerto Rico and moved to Brooklyn when she was 13, knowing little English. She is the oldest of 11 children. She graduated magna cum laude from Harvard. She has written 3 critically acclaimed memoirs, When I Was Puerto Rican and Almost a Woman, adapted into a Peabody Award-winning film, plus novels, anthologies, essays, and a children's book. We are here to talk about your book, Las Madres, The Mothers. Luis Alberto Urrea was born in the border city of Tijuana. His father was from Mexico. His mother was the only American in his family, from Staten Island. I always get to I don't know. He has written more than 20 books of fiction, nonfiction, poetry, and was a Pulitzer finalist for the seminal book on the border, The Devil's Highway. He is a distinguished professor of creative writing at the University of Illinois, Chicago. Your book is Goodnight, Irene. So some housekeeping. The organizers thank the James Madison Council for sponsoring the Inspiration Stage. There will be a Q&A, so feel free to start formulating your questions now. And at 4:30, both authors will sign their books on level 2, and instructions are also online. So I'm a reporter at the Washington Post, but these are also 2 of my favorite writers in the world, people who I've been reading for decades. So it's a great honor for me to be up here. In these books, the mothers, the women, are the protagonists, the heroes. And so to start with Esmeralda, Las Madres spans generations of women who help one another survive catastrophes, public and private. When you say mothers, do you just mean it in the traditional sense of mothers who have given birth, who have had their own children? Who are the mothers to you?
I think, to me, all women are mothers. You don't have to carry them in a womb. You didn't even have to raise them. You just have to mother them in the way that traditional mothers do. And in the case of Las Madres, there are 5 women. 3 of them are mothers. 2 of them are their daughters. And their daughters have no children, but they're mothers as well, because they take care of other people. And so I really like to expand the definition of motherhood.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And Goodnight, Irene is a fictional account of the true story of women who volunteered to serve in World War II in the Red Cross. Not as nurses, but as donut makers, but much more than that. They were people who provided boosted morale. They were friends. They were comforters. They were brave. They were in great danger. They did not have to do this. They were your mother. So why did they do this? Who are the women you wrote about in Goodnight, Irene?
My mom. These women were heroes. So I believe we live in a matriarchy, and that's why so many men are so difficult. Cheap applause line, I'm sorry, but I mean it. And we were talking backstage about this, las madres y las comadres. I lived in a world of women, and the men were either absent or allowed to bluster and crow like a rooster and then wander off, and the women got back to running the world. So I think, when the cataclysm of World War II came, and there were women who wanted to serve, and judging by certainly my mother and her truck mate, Jill, who became Dorothy in the novel, they didn't want to be in the rear. They wanted to be at the heart of things, but there weren't that many opportunities for them to do it. And so they flocked to the Red Cross, to get into the Clubmobile Corps, driving 2.5-ton trucks with galleys on the back to make coffee and donuts and play records and minister to these young men, and they didn't know what they were getting into exactly, but they knew that they would be at the front. It was a great adventure, and all the strictures were relieved all of a sudden. They were independent women on the road, setting their own path, because they were often told, go that way, go see what's going on, and they would go. And I think it was dangerous, overwhelming, but also so liberating. You know, that these women, I think once they came home, they didn't know how to tuck themselves back into the little box that they felt they'd been put in. And I think that was part of their well, certainly my mother's suffering. Yes. Jill took it better.
Yeah, we will talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, we will.
Good, thank you. Esmeralda, toward the start of your book, there is a terrible sudden tragedy. And there are multiple tragedies, but in the one that just struck me so much, it was one perfect paragraph, and it just hit you so hard with what happens to Luce, one of the main characters. And she's left to recover. What was the inspiration for that character, that moment?
Well, at the risk of sounding new agey and woohoo, my characters always just appear to me. I don't really, I knew I wanted to write a book about related to Hurricane Maria. And when Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico, I was in my warm, cozy home in upstate New York. And originally I thought I would write about the Puerto Ricans who were going through that experience at a distance and the kinds of things that we did to deal with that situation as much as we could from our homes and from our communities. Many of us moving, traveling back and forth from Puerto Rico. But this character decided, oh no, I want to be in a book that was in this hurricane. I'm going like, okay. And so I began to write from the perspective of I have to find a way to place this character. Well, little by little, 4 other women emerged, all of them related to Luz. And so my job then became to listen to what these women were saying to me about each other and about themselves and about the situation that they were in. And it was a very, very different experience from any of my other books. I'm a inveterate outliner, notes. I mean, I'm just like paper all over my office. but this one actually came in a different kind of organism where the voices would appear really literally sometimes. I'd just be washing dishes and there would be a phrase or I'd have a vision of something that was happening. And because I've been doing this for a long time now, I trust that process. I just trusted that those voices were going to guide me to where I needed to go, that in fact, they were not coming from outside, obviously. They're somewhere inside me. This book is already written inside me. I just have to listen and then write it. And so I have these very, very bloated first drafts with just everything. I don't know if that's the case for you, but I mean, it's like, for 300-page finished book, I would have written a 700-page draft. So I just allow that to happen, and then I'm a ruthless editor, and then begin to cut. And the book becomes real after I've spilled my guts on the page, basically, and then start to clean up.
Well, can we talk about that? I mean, how do you go about researching and writing and assembling everything? I mean, does it look like a scene from The Beautiful Mind in your office where the entire thing is covered in everything and everything's everywhere? Or how do you organize and then write the?
Well, I'm one of these people who is very organized inside. Yeah. But if you go to my office, it is like a hurricane has hit. Yeah. There's paper everywhere. There's sticky notes on the wall. Sometimes on the ceiling. I have slanted ceilings in my office. They're like sticking up there. I do a lot of sketching. I don't draw very well, but before I place a character in a room, I always make a little, where do they enter? How do they go out? Are there windows? Are there shelves? Are there furniture? So that kind of stuff I do by hand, and then just have it, because I never know when I'm going to need it. So that's the way this one evolved. I just really, basically, again, it's a question of listening and trusting that the information that I need for the book is going to emerge. But also there is a lot of reading and a lot of research that needs to happen. I was not there during the hurricane, so I had to read a lot about, how it happened, both from the perspective of Noah, and perspective of people who are on the ground suffering from it. So there's a lot of reading that takes place, and lots of little notes everywhere. But then when I start writing, I don't consult them. I just, my husband can't believe it. He's like, "Do you need the one?" Well, yeah, for now. But once a book is done, everything comes down, and then I start with the next one.
Because it's amazing, because it doesn't read that way at all. It reads in such a clear and powerful way that it's amazing that is your. And I'm curious also about Luis. How do you do it? I mean, how do you do so much research for your books, and how do you organize it? How do you sit down to write?
Gee, I'm not all that organized. I'd like to be. Because every little moment seems incredibly important to me. And so it's hard to kind of sift through incidents and oddness, and messages from beyond that come.
Yeah.
They really do.
Yeah.
I've had whole scenes just play out, not in my head. I felt like I was listening, and it was, wow, what is going on? I don't know how to explain that. Maybe it's mystical. But also I work in partnership with my wife, Cindy, who's a journalist, and she's much more ordered than I am. When I was working on Goodnight Irene and trying to get all of World War II in my mind, and she's like, "Here, let's make a timeline." What magic is this? Order? What? And so I was working on this, and it's about my mother. So I have a statue of my mother somebody had made, a painting of my mother, a picture of my mom, a bin full of her photographs and scratchings and journals and so forth, books about World War II, books about the donut dollies. The cat is sleeping on a manuscript. The dog is sleeping on part of another one, and me in the middle, listening to Nine Inch Nails really loud because I can't deal with what I'm trying to write. And somehow, this stuff filters through nonetheless. And I think for me, it's the truth of the feeling of what's happening that I have to pair with actual measurable historical truth. Because if, writing a World War II novel, it seems to be the favorite source of reading in America, you're going to have to get things right because people are going to contend against it. Especially with my beloved donut dollies who were erased. And, for example, the publisher thought, oh, Luis has finally written a World War II novel. This is great, right? So I had all these, please write a column for these guys, write a column for those. And I was trying to not write the same column over and over, but the first one was at the New York Times, and it went out on the Electronic Times, and they got 500 responses. So I started thinking, this is interesting, and they ran it in print the next day. But I got, and believe me, my brothers, I love you to the bottom of my heart, but there are some mansplainers out there. And, these guys were writing things like, those gals were so far in the rear they never even heard a gun go off. And I thought, boy, I wish you could talk to my mom, or I wish you could talk to Miss Jill. Yeah. My mother was nearly killed. She was physically wiped out. So, I just thought, okay. And I'm sure you feel the same way. You know, I think part of what may fuel us is just representation. You know, and I've often written about people that other people don't see or think about or remember, or give the honor that they're owed. So I think I'm trying to find that path, and you know, thank God Cindy's there to remind me. So the historical record. Oh yeah, right, yeah. And I had my mom's, you know, whole journey in my hands, and then when we met Jill, the last living driver. And we're friends with her from the age of 94 till 102 when she died, had a living witness. And, you know, the last thing I'll say is that part of the difficulty, if you're writing something like this, is that the Red Cross Records building burned. So they disappeared gone with the wind, you know. So it's been incredible having that, and the World War II donut dollies are gone, but my new sisters from the Vietnam era are here. And probably here.
Are they here?
Are there any here?
Any dollies?
Are you really? Could you stand up?
Stand up, yeah.
Stand up, y'all. Oh!
Brava.
Oh! Whoa! I see your shirt. American heroes, right there. So that's been the biggest blessing, perhaps, of my writing life. And I want to tell y'all, by the way, your representatives in Colorado came to my reading and sat in the front row, right? And I thought, oh no. And as I was reading, I'd look at them and they'd be like, But they gave me a service medal, you know, and since then, God bless you. Stick around. So
That's very sweet.
That was great, and thank you. Esmeralda, I wanted to ask you too, I mean, because both of you, Luis, just jumping off what you said about writing about people who have been erased, you know, I think both of you have spent your careers writing about people who have been misunderstood, ignored, or literally erased from the historical narrative. And in Puerto Rico, so often, and Puerto Ricans in the United States, but I think also especially on the island, is one of those places. You know, people think it's farther away than it is. People think Puerto Ricans are immigrants, not US-born Americans. You know, when you go into the middle of Puerto Rico, there's a VFW outpost. They're veterans.
Yeah.
They served, and it's you know, it's part of the United States, but also linked to the United States. And I wanted to ask you about that too. I mean, what your goal was in writing about Puerto Rico at this moment, and how you feel about its relationship with the United States, especially during and after the hurricane that it's still recovering from.
Yeah, well, it's been 6 years, and there are people who still have no electricity in Puerto Rico. Just let that sink in. Well, I've always written about Puerto Rico. I feel like I actually write historical fiction because everything that happened was years ago. My goal with this particular book, especially, was that what happened in Puerto Rico on September 20th, 2017, that it never be forgotten. And that, because I write in English, I knew that it would reach beyond the island, because they know what happened. They live with it still. I was there. I can't tell you how many blackouts we experienced. I was just there last week, and I was doing events where all of a sudden there was no electricity, and of course you kind of have to wait it out. But for many of us who live outside of Puerto Rico, whether we're Puerto Ricanos or not, I wanted to make sure that we never forget either, because it really is a historical event. But after a few weeks after the hurricane, Puerto Rico disappears from the news channels. We do not hear anymore about what happened there, and yet people are still living on the, you know, they don't have any roofs, they don't have any water, they have no electricity. And that's where I felt it was very important to write not the reportage about this thing, but to write what people experienced. They were there. What did they feel? What was it like? For me, I had a lot of statistics. I had a lot of testimonies. I had a lot of interviews. I read a lot. You would not believe how many statistics an event like this creates. I'm telling you, it's just really shocking. And yet, very, very few conversations or reports are about about one person who's suffering through this. And I really wanted to go there. I wanted to go to that place, and so that it would not be forgotten. Now there's a book that exists that I hope will survive the apocalypse whenever it comes, and that if Puerto Rico disappears, I want people to know that this happened in this place, and this is how people experienced, and this is how they dealt with it. So that's the second half of the book, by the way. The first half is about how do people get to that point? How do you have your life, you're moving along, you're doing what you always do, and all of a sudden you're in the midst of a catastrophe. And what happens to you at that point? What happens after that takes place? And those things are things that I think about a lot. For me, I always thought, coming to the United States as a 13-year-old with no English. I was from a rural part of Puerto Rico. I ended up in Brooklyn. I mean, it was a big change. And I always thought that it's the most traumatic thing that's ever happened to me. And then I realized that's nothing compared to what my cousins and my auntie and my friends experienced on that day. And so it puts things in perspective for me, but it made it even more important for me to make sure that I get it right and that I get it down and that people can learn about it.
Yeah. You're so modest, you know, because you also underwent a personal, not catastrophe, but you had a stroke, and it temporarily robbed you of your ability to read and write, and something most people will never know, because if you read this latest book, because it's dazzling, it's beautifully written, as all your work is, and can you speak about that? Did that influence? I mean, one of your characters literally has to learn those same things. Was that something a character you could have written before that happened, before you fought your own way back?
I think before the stroke, I don't think I could have written this character. I don't think I would have dared. You know, I was a dancer. I'm healthy. I walk around. I have never had a disability until one day I woke up and I had one. And so I don't think I would have even attempted to write a character like Luz, because I didn't think I knew enough about that, and there was no way that I could really embody that kind of experience. But then I realized, well, here I am, and this happened, and after my stroke, I learned how to read and write, obviously, because now I'm still writing. It was a long haul. I was in the middle of Conquistadora when that happened, and I had to basically take 2 years to learn how to read or write, so then I could continue this book, because I was determined to finish it. And because, if there are any doctors in the room, my doctor told me, you don't say that to your patient. He says, well, if you've had a stroke, you have a 50% of having another. So like every morning, I wake up and I'm like, oh, thank God. I'm here. Another day I can write. It's just like, so all of a sudden time became absolutely, I feel like I'm running all the time now, because any moment this 50% could come up, and I feel very burdened by it, and I did not want my character to feel that burden, and so I gave her amnesia.
Is that why? Oh, that's incredible. I didn't know. I'm so glad you told us that story. Oh, that's incredible.
Yeah.
That's. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, you have to read these books. Really, they're tremendous. So both of you use humor, and you write about so many sad things, but your books also make us laugh out loud. How do you do that? Like, why? Is that on purpose? Is it just because interspersed in these chapters, I find myself just laughing out loud? And why is that? How do you?
I have a writing rule with my writing students, and I always tell them, laughter is a virus that infects us with humanity. And it's really difficult, and I don't mean mocking evil laughter. It's really difficult to sit with somebody and laugh together about something and then get up and walk away and say, oh, those people are jerks, I hate them. It's very difficult. And it kind of came to well, first of all, we come from people who are really funny. And, we were just laughing backstage about our words for pain. Ay, comadre, tengo calambres. So the folklore kind of the cultures we come from are amazing. But I think everybody has them. And everybody also has what we call magical realism. We all have these fabulous stories. And when I was touring on Hummingbird's Daughter, for example, people would come up to me and say, boy, I wish we had stories like you have in this family. I said, really? Where are you from? Ireland. I'm German. I said, you think you don't have amazing stories? So, part of it, I think, is making us embrace each other's humanity. We both write about people that have gotten a rough go of it in the public opinion sometimes, depending on the administration. But, then it's difficult because you share something profound. And the other part of it, and I know you do this, I trust that you do this, I believe you do this, but as composers, if I could have been, if I couldn't be Leonard Cohen, the songwriter, I would be Leonard Cohen, the poet and novel writer, right? I wish I could do the music, but I think we're composing. And so you have to find ways to have that symphony move. And there's a lot. I could have written Goodnight Irene, for example, just dirge, 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 then some shocking thing for a bombing, dirge, dirge. But that's not it. That's those best friends who are living this life completely on their own, by their rules, in their truck, serving the boys they love, serving the country they love, and as my mother called him, they got to travel with Georgie Patton, dear boy. Wow, Mom, what was up with that? George Patton, yes, I know, Mom. So to be fettered and freed in the world, and to be changing the world, and to know you are, even if other people aren't. I think that's a sacred task as a writer to get that across. And you imagine me trying to write a Border Patrol book. They didn't want me there. They tried everything in their power to keep me from doing it for the Devil's Highway. Yet once they put me through hazing, ritual hazing, I didn't know they were doing it. I just thought they were possessed by Satan. I realized that they were waiting to see what I was made of. Yeah. What do you got? What do you got? We're going to terrorize you. And they did. And there came that moment when someone looks in your eyes and they connect finally. Yeah. And then they opened everything, which was the weirdest thing because I hardly consider Border Patrol agents my buddies. Yet they trusted me. And over they would say, just tell the truth, even if you don't like it. Yeah. We'll know if you're making things up about us. So that to me is sacred duty, don't you think?
No, I think so. I don't set out when people tell me my books are funny, I'm always surprised. And I think it's because, Puerto Ricanos are people who laugh a lot. I don't know if any of you remember when the governor of Puerto Rico was ousted by the people of Puerto Rico. And, how was that done? Yes, people went out with the pots and pans, and they just started banging, and they're dancing on the road, and they're singing. And so it was a very, very, very dramatic, awful things were happening. And they weren't out there crying or anything. They were out there singing, making noise, making sure that they were heard. And this is what I so much love about Puerto Ricanos, is that we look for the lightness in the dark. We don't like to live in the darkness, maybe because we're in the tropics, it's always sunny, or not always, but always bright. But I think we seek that. And so when I write about real people, that has to come through with the things that they say. I really don't set out to make you laugh, but if you laugh, I'm really happy. And I would like to know, where did you laugh, you know, because I'm going like, oh, really? Okay, well, that's really fascinating, you know, because it's not a deliberate attempt to make you laugh, but I did want to bring the realness of our experience, and we are people who do that. We seek to look at the light in the darkness in every situation and any opportunity, and even in the Baquines. Even when I was growing up, when somebody died, and they were laid out in their homes, people would be singing, and it was a party. We were sad they were going, but there was always this sense of celebration of the life that these people had lived. So there's always that positivity in spite of the ugly things that happened.
Yeah, no, I think it just must be the fullness of the characters, you know, because if it was only one way, they wouldn't be as full and memorable as they are.
Well, thank you.
No, it's true.
I think that it's so true what you're saying. We're very, even those among us who aren't necessarily literary or readers or poets or writers, there's something that we're attentive to stories so much in both our cultures, I think, and a great respect for it. Even if you don't know, you have the respect for it. You know, when the comadres, where the abuelita begins to talk, even the tough dudes are like, shh, cállese. They listen, they're smoking. You know?
That's right.
I had a book come out, and it was essentially about my family on the barrio, and a novel. And a bunch of the tougher element who'd never read a book, never gone to a bookstore, came to the bookstore in La Jolla, and it's like Cremitaville, and there are all these cholos outside smoking, and I walked up, and they're like, "Oh, tío, am I in that book you wrote in?" And I just said, "Yeah, órale, man." They would never look. And we go inside, and it seems to me like a scene from one of your books. I walk in, and my elders, my family, are all in the front row.
Oh, sí.
In their suits from 1978. They've still got
Colonia.
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah. They're all wearing like the same thing, Aramis or something, And I get up on stage, and they all hold my book up like I don't know I've written it. Mira el libro. It's like, thank you. And I do the thing, and then there's a signing line. Yeah. And the nephew that clearly inspired one of the characters gets up, pushes people out of the way, says, "Tío, I gotta talk to you, man." And I thought, okay, here it comes. He's gonna be mad. His name's Juanito. And I said, "Okay, Juanito, what is it?" And he says, "I just want to know one thing. Who's gonna play me in the movie, dog?"
Oh, sí, they all want to know that.
¿Verdad que sí? So how can you not laugh?
You have to laugh.
You can either be embarrassed or see the genius of all this and laugh.
Yeah, no, this is when I wrote the screenplay for Almost a Woman. So I was out in California, and we were casting the actresses and the actors who were going to play my siblings and my mom and her husbands. And so I talked to my mommy, and I said, "Oh, we're in this process of casting somebody to play you." And she says, "Look, all I care about, tiene que ser bien linda."
Ándale.
because
Yeah.
I was beautiful in those days. I looked like Elizabeth Taylor with black eyes. So don't have no ugly woman playing me. So we really had to tell the cinematographer, the director, the producers, if my mother doesn't see a beautiful woman up there, we are going to be in trouble with this. So there were a lot of actresses who came up who were wonderful actresses, but I was only looking at it from the perspective of, oh my God, she does not look like Elizabeth Taylor with black eyes. There we go, next.
Well, this is the perfect setup for my next question. Thank you. I wanted to ask about your mothers. I wanted to ask if you could tell us their names. Irene was your mother's middle name.
Yes.
And what you, I mean, we're talking about humor, but your mother had real difficulties dealing with what she experienced during World War II. And that is not easy to grow up a kid in that environment. And so I'm curious about what you knew about your mother going into this and what you learned about her writing this book.
Mom was a character, no question. She was a New Yorker. She's not only the only American in my Mexican family, but certainly the only New Yorker who had been raised in, as she said it, when New York was New York, dear boy. And she was from Staten Island, which I thought, what a miraculous garden space it must be, to hear her talk. And then during research for the book, Cindy and I finally went to Staten Island. We were like, this is different. Great pizza, killer bagels. Their baseball team on Staten Island is known as the Pizza Rats. She would not have approved of that. But she was from Richmond Village, which was the revolutionary village. It's in the heart of the island, and it's still much like it was. And she was raised in Manhattan. They had an antique store, and they sold antiques to John Steinbeck. And they were not allowed to ever mention Steinbeck because he wanted his privacy. And Albert Einstein, who used to go drinking beer with her uncle. Her uncle called him Al. So she was very, cosmopolitan. And she had a terrible relationship. And to show everybody, she went to war. That was my mom, willful. But she came back broken, physically broken. And she got back in 1946 after a lot of rehab. By 1947, she had left New York, moved to Sausalito. She met my father, and she had stayed in touch with the Donatellis. Met my father and went with him to Mexico, and by 1954 vanished from the Donatellis as well. And we didn't understand that this was PTSD talking, that she became more and more isolated and however, that witty person also didn't change. And here's a little irony that is so, I think, Latin American literature. So she was Donatelli, wounded, came home, forgotten, erased, feeling nobody cared. She thought I didn't care. The hippies didn't care. She couldn't believe the world had changed. My father's first job when he came across the border was driving a donut truck.
Wow.
And he could not understand why she thought this was hilarious. She never told us why it was funny. And then years later, my first paying job was cooking donuts at a donut shop. And again, I thought, what the hell's so funny, Mom? And I was 13, 14, leaving the house angrily, and she'd always say, dear boy, don't forget to bring Mother a box of donuts. And I thought, what's funny about this? So she always had that sense of joie de vivre going on. But that's what she was like, and she was very, I talked about this last night, but she was very literary, and I'd grown up with a Tijuana accent. And if I get really tired, I start talking like Tijuana again. And she didn't like it. She didn't call me Luis, she called me Louis. Louis, dear boy. And so she began a campaign of terror by force-feeding me literature. Every night, she'd read to me, every night. And she started with Dickens. And I couldn't understand what she was talking about. It was like Martian. And then she would affect a British accent, she's reading about, the Artful Dodger. I was like, what is he talking about? And then she switched to Mark Twain. And then from Mark Twain to the Jungle Books. And then she said, dear boy, how would you like a library card? You can have 14 books a week. So we took two buses every weekend. And then I'd stack up and she didn't approve of what I wanted to read, but she knew that I was reading. And she observed that as she descended into nightmares and awfulness, she focused on me starting to write. And I told the people last night, she got out her World War II typewriter, cleaned it up, put a stack of papers in the kitchen. And when I came home from school one day, she said, dear boy, there's a little present for you in the kitchen. And I thought, cool, it's like a James Bond cap gun or something. And I went out there and it was a typewriter. I was like, typing, Mom? And she said, just try. I think you'll like it. So I put in the paper suspiciously, and I was like, bang, bang, bang. Bang, bang, bang. Oh, bang, bang, bang. And I realized first it was neat, and it looked like it had been published. Right? I thought, whoa, because I was never going to publish a book. Did you ever think? I didn't think we got to publish books. No. And so I'm doing it, and then the old typewriters, the old-timers like me will remember that it had a ribbon, and part of it was red, and part of it was black, and ours was broken, so my words were half black and half red. And I was like, my words are on fire. But this is the genius of our moms. Yeah. Out of nothing. We always joke about in Mexico, and maybe the same in Puerto Rico, but one of our family rules was, out of nothing, food. No hay nada que comer. Oh, I've got some spoiled tortillas. Well, you see what I make? That's what it was like. So my mother was watching this, and I actually had asserted myself for the first time ever, typing. And I had a little stack of pages, very thin, but it was a stack. And one day I came home from school, and the same routine. Dear boy, I have another surprise for you. It's in the kitchen. And I thought, okay, Mom, whatever. And I went in the kitchen, and she had sewed my pages together and made a book cover.
That's so sweet.
My first book. And, I've said this before, but I really thought so. I was the best-selling author in the kitchen. I had no one to show it to, so I was showing to the dog, and the dog was jumping around. So I said, yeah. But she knew the die was cast. And the last little thing I'll say about what she was like was, we didn't have any money. My father had died badly, all this stuff. And I got the job at expository writing at Harvard. I'd never been anywhere. I thought, I'm going to die when I get to New England. And we didn't have a lot of money, and Christmas came. And my mother's Christmas gift to me that year is a little strip of antique wrapping paper. Open it. So I opened it, and it was postage stamps. And she said, this is so you'll submit one more poem or story to a magazine.
That's so sweet. Well, I wish my mother had encouraged me to write. My mother actually discouraged every artistic effort that I attempted,
really?
Because she was sure I would live on welfare the rest of my life. so she, whenever I wanted to be a dancer, they don't make any money. I go to performing arts high school learning to be an actress. I was not a very good actress, admittedly, but she was sure that I was going to starve, that I would be dependent on her the rest of my life. At every turn, I was discouraged, but I'm one of these stubborn people that the more you say no to somebody, sometimes the more they want to do it. And so I maintained this desire and this energy of creative endeavor. And I became a dancer for many, many years. I became a filmmaker. I still am. And it wasn't until I was 38 that I began to write. I did not think, I was a avid reader, but I didn't think of myself as a writer until I looked at we lived in a suburban neighborhood in Boston, Hingham, you might have heard of Hingham, south of Boston. And I was sure I was the only Puerto Rican in the entire South Shore of Boston in the 1970s. And I realized my children are growing up in this community and they will not know anything about me and their titis and their primos and primas and all the Spanish-speaking people that came in and out of their lives in confusing configurations. And so that's when I decided to write. But in other respects, though, Mommy really is, for me, she is the inspiration in spite of the fact that she was not encouraging of my artistic endeavors. She pushed me to do what I wanted to do, even as she told me not to do it. So it was almost as if my defiance was something that she was proud of. And had I figured that out sooner than age 38, I probably would have written sooner. But it was when I Was Puerto Rican comes out, and it's first in English. A year later, it comes out in Spanish. So in English, my siblings would read to her only the only the paragraph in which the word mommy appears. Because that's all she wanted to know. I just want to know, how do I come off in this book? I had not shared with anyone in my family that I was writing a memoir, and they didn't actually read it until they received the published copy that I sent to them that the publisher sent me. I said, I need a box to give to my siblings because there's a lot of them. And so that's how my mother learned that she is a character in this book. And then at the end of, somebody asked her some years later. She used to come to all my events whenever I was near her in Puerto Rico and Florida, wherever. She's constantly moving. And so she would always kind of sit emperifollada, con su perfume and her jewelry, dollar store, but looked nice. The hair, the makeup, the whole thing. And then she waited for people to ask her a question. And people did. And so people would ask, what do you think about about you in the book? She says, I don't understand this. Everybody talks that she's writing this book about her, but the book is about me. And she doesn't speak like that, but that was the attitude. She actually was very, she was very serious about those things. So that was really interesting to me that she never, I'm the eldest of 11, and when she passed away, and we all got together, and we were all talking to one another, we each one had a different mother. They all had like a completely different portrait of this person. And my portrait of her was my muse. I mean, by resisting, by kind of challenging me at every turn, I think she understood that I was going to not pay attention. Whereas my other siblings are much more, they kind of paid more attention to her. But it was so interesting to learn that, and I miss her terribly. But I know that she's one of the voices that's constantly whispering in my ear.
Yeah, thank goodness. Yeah, this is so beautiful, and now we'd love to open it up to questions if anyone has any. I'm definitely having trouble seeing the lights, but.
There are microphones.
Oh, there are microphones, great. And so you can go up and feel free to ask. Thank you.
Hello, hello. Muy buenas tardes. Esmeralda, Santiago, it's so wonderful to see you again. Last time I saw you, it was over 30 years ago when
Oh my goodness.
cuando era puertorriqueña came out. I was going to ask you a few questions about this one, but then you started talking about your mothers. And Esmeralda, after I read Cuando era puertorriqueña, and then the next one, and then you wrote El amante turco. And I kept wondering, I wonder how Esmeralda's mother is going to be living and reacting to this. And then suddenly she shows up in Miami. And I am thinking, con una chancleta en cada mano, right? With a sandal in each hand. Anyways, I gave that book to so many of my friends, especially as they started having teenage girls. But here we are. Esta novela es preciosa, Las Madres. And I had an hada madrina. So I am reading, Shirley and Ada's characters as if we need more of those type of women in our lives. It really does take a village, and you were talking about las comadres, and I just loved it. So my question, though, was going to be, Maria, you brought it up about the amnesia, and knowing of your stroke and everything, and I'm reading, and I'm like, luces Esmeralda. And then the amnesia, and then you just mentioned that the best thing you could do in her case was to give her amnesia. But I wanted to ask you more about that. ¿De dónde sale? I mean, how did that happen? When you said, I'm going to give her amnesia.
Well, somebody asked me, I was doing a podcast with a journalist, and so he wanted to know what was Luz's diagnosis. Because I never say that the diagnosis, and I said it's called Santiagoitis, and I made it up. I made what she is suffering through. To me, I just completely invented it because I needed her to have that problem. and so this is, it really, her experience is based on my experience during those very fraught weeks after my stroke, during and after my stroke. But then I really needed more because I recovered completely, but this character has other issues that she doesn't recover from. And so there is not maybe there's a doctor in the house who reads it and can tell me, but it really is something completely invented, and a lot of it, I needed it for dramatic purposes. And that is the joy of writing fiction. If I had written a memoir about my stroke, it would be a completely different story.
So then, should we go to the other side? We'll just switch back and forth. So the question over here?
Yeah, I appreciate everyone's vulnerability. This is just lovely. It's great to hear. I'm going to make a bit of a self-absorbed question here. After some counseling on my own, I sort of inspirationally felt compelled to write this semi-autobiographical novella about some life stories that happened to me as a kid. And as I wrote, I fictionalized the names of different family members and different people. But I know that in my portrait, one of the siblings that's featured, I basically, if I'll be frank, I pretty much damned in lots of derogatory ways. That I've not shared the novella with anyone. I mean, I've shared it with friends and with some folks who've been receptive to it, but I've not shared it with the family. How do I communicate to the family member, again, I'm being self-absorbed here, how do I communicate to them by, hey, this is the way I see what I had growing up, but so.
Well, I told when my siblings said, everybody's named what they're named in my memoirs. The only people that I might change a name is my siblings and people close to me in my family. they get the first dibs for the name. So I happen to know somebody, my sister's name is Edna, and one of the people that I met subsequently had the same name, and so I had to change her rather than my sibling. But what I said to them is, look, what I wrote is what I saw through these eyes. It only came from here. And your experience is probably different because nobody can see your life through your eyes except for you. And I tried to let them know I love them, but I also, in order to make them real, I have to show their flaws because nobody's perfect. And it's very, very important as a memoir writer, particularly, you have to be honest. Somebody asked me earlier today, about writing memoir. I said, if you're worried about the people in your life not accepting what you write, and you're being upset about it, then maybe you shouldn't write it because you don't have the freedom to write the reality that you experienced. That's what memoir is. It's about your reality, not about yours, not about that one, or my siblings. I had to say, this was not your story. Like I said earlier, my mother was a different mother to 11 children, and they were all different. So make sure that they know that this is your experience, your perspective, and maybe you got some things wrong, but that's what you experience, and this is what you feel. And I'm sorry if it hurt your feelings, but that's the way it is.
Thank you both.
Okay, thank you. And question over here?
Luis, I loved your book,
Thank you.
but there were some awfully hard things in there about that World War II stuff. Thank you for the humor, though. But you said that your mom, came back with the PTSD. So how did you find out her whole story?
Talking to her, finding things out. I didn't know about Buchenwald until I, against her wishes, opened up her army trunk. The army had given them all foot lockers. And she told me not to open it. So I won't, Mom. And as soon as she went to work, I did. And I found the pictures from Buchenwald. So she was forced, because she knew as soon as she came home that I'd opened it. Pandora's box, indeed, And she had to sit me down and explain what that was. That was my first glimpse of the Holocaust, from my mother being there and bringing back pictures of piles of corpses. And you can imagine not knowing what to make of your mom then. And, she would let things slip, and things would slip. And she started to write poetry, and she wrote some memoir stuff. And, she told me enough for me to start piecing it together. And then we met her truck driver, Jill, who was 94 years old at the time, long after my mother was dead. And Jill did not have PTSD. She had the strongest control I've ever seen of anybody. She died at 102. So all those years, Cindy and I hung out with Miss Jill. And she had pictures of my mom, of course. And I hope this will, because we're running out of time, but this might help. So we went to see her. Once we knew she was alive, we thought she was gone. We went to her apartment. She lived 90 minutes away from our house, which seemed like a miracle in and of itself. And when we walked in, 94 years old, she had a picture of my mother on the wall, framed, beautiful, looking like a starlet. And she said, I drove the truck, but your mother brought the joy. And it was the first time I saw my mother, 27 years old, beautiful, out to save the world. So it was thanks to Miss Jill in a lot of ways that I discovered my mom. But again, all the ways in which my mom let slip her history.
Thank you. That's
Time's up.
Okay. Sorry to say that time is up, but there will be book signings after this at 4:30. If we could please have an applause. It's been a wonderful conversation. Thank you.